have you ever thought about what you'd really want on Father's Day?
What I don't want is like a pair of socks and like a bag of Rocky Road, you know. Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
That's fatphobic.
I don't build wall. I just own halfway to Seawalk.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
I act as if God exists.
Put your masks on.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams, my childhood, with your empty words.
Good evening.
Good evening, Andy. How you doing?
Good. Welcome to the show. So you've been doing lots of fathering today?
Today and every day. So I think I've been doing it for a month now, being the stay-at-home father. And I've got to say it was a very strong start. The first week I was very enthusiastic, even got some self-care in, things were going well. I was like, I've got this, very efficient, even did some exercise. And then it all just went downhill from there. It just like, there was sickness, there was the sleep fell apart, and the last couple of weeks have been the true definition of just surviving. And the routine and my previous life is in shambles right now.
So how old is the little one now?
11 months today.
11 months. So I must admit, I've forgotten all the key sort of milestones and stuff like that. But 11 months, is that old enough that you can every now and then just sort of step away for 5 minutes and have or is it, that's still a bit away?
Let me answer that by painting you a picture of what happened today. My dad came back to the house, and when he walked into the house, the kitchen high chair was pointing directly into the toilet. So I cannot even leave her alone to use the toilet without her killing herself or, just going crazy. We're in that period now where she's about to walk, which is still quite early, but just has to be supervised 24/7. Cannot leave her alone, even to go to the toilet. And so it's really high maintenance at the moment. Yeah.
Do you think that's what's the age that stops, right? I know you get there eventually, but at what age can you just sort of, maybe not 5 minutes, but even 1 minute, right? What is it?
Look, I mean, as unsatisfying as it is, it depends on the kid. It depends when they walk, how mobile they are, how crazy they are. I was talking to someone at work, and they were fully traumatized because their sons, actually, both of them, just had this thing where as soon as they could walk, they would just run away. Literally, he'd be saying that they'd be walking, on the street, and the kids would just bolt into the middle of the streets. And wouldn't, you call for them, they wouldn't come back, and they just keep running. And I've had that experience once with my eldest, with my daughter. We were at a park actually, and she just started running. And I don't know whether she couldn't hear us or she just ignoring us, but she just kept on running. And you just had no choice but to run after her as she went off into the distance. So I don't actually know when that happens. I think it's different for every kid, and I think it's also different for, and we've spoken about this before, how careful you are as a parent, right? If you have a she'll be right mate attitude, your kid may take a couple more knocks to the head, but maybe you'll be overall less stressed, less kind of helicoptery. And there's obviously a balance that goes with that. So yeah, it's one of those things, I think. But as we said before, if you want to do it right, it takes everything. You give everything, and there's not much left at the end of the day, which is the tough thing. Yeah. You've repressed all those memories. It's been too long for you.
I honestly don't. I don't remember these things. I was actually, before we kicked off, I was going to ask a hypothetical question. I had my son earlier than you had your first child. So theoretically, I have more experience in terms of numbers of years as a father, right?
No, this is true.
But you have multiple kids, right? I've only got the one. So I guess my question is...
So are you trying to say, Andy, that you're longer but I'm girthier? Is that what
Well, that's a good way of putting it. But like in terms of the experience of being a father, right? Like, I suppose you have like this concentrated experience at between a certain range of ages, right? So you probably have much more vivid sense of like what being a father at a certain age range is like than I would.
Yeah.
But I suppose I've got like a longer view, a bigger view in terms of the different phases of childhood and what it's like as you evolve, right? And it's an interesting kind of question, like what like experience as a father, right? Because I don't know, you probably, haven't done the maths on it, but we probably have similar years of experience as a father if you count each child separate, right? What are the ages of your kids?
Yeah, so we've got 7, 3, and let's just say 1.
So, you know what? Literally exactly the same years experience.
Yeah.
Because I've got one almost 11-year-old, right? So that's 10 plus 11 months.
I see what you're getting at. But, like a 3-year-old's not half a 6-year-old and so on, unfortunately. Yeah, it's an interesting piece, right? And I actually have never thought it like that. I have to remind myself sometimes because life is so different for you with, your boy approaching being a teen, right? And a whole different set of challenges. But from where I'm sitting with with younger kids, it looks like sweet, sweet freedom. So I don't like, I must admit, I write it off for you sometimes because, it just seems like there's so much more freedom, and there is. But a different set of challenges, I will admit, and ones that I obviously haven't even thought of yet have had to navigate, right? And I think this is the thing, this is the trap, right? Like when you're in the early days, it becomes almost like a badge of honor, like almost like a morbid race to say like who's the most tired, who's had it the hardest, and I don't think that is actually very helpful. Like everyone has a very, very different experience when it comes to being a father. Everyone has different fathers. And so, I actually think that you need to keep a really open mind when it comes to these things and what family situations are like, right? Like you have no idea in some ways, right? Yet everybody wants to give you advice.
I think the biggest thing that's different, like definitely, like there's no question about it. There's absolutely no way that an older child is anywhere near as hard as a younger child. And indeed, you probably need the light at the end of the tunnel to keep you sane, right? So that to me is like one of the greatest like truths we have. But the biggest difference is that when they're young, they're almost like, sure, babies are fairly sort of finicky, right? There's no button to press to feed and to go to sleep, or so they're a little bit unpredictable in that sense. But at the end of the day, to fulfill your responsibilities as a parent, like as a good parent, it's a fairly narrow range of things you should be doing, right? It's, okay, you help them sleep, you make sure they're fed, you take them to the doctor if they, look sick or whatever. But I guess when they get older, the nuances of being a good parent start to become very, very complex. And that's the bit that's, like even down to like what one parent might think is a good strategy, another parent could have 180 degrees opposite view and have like arguable reasons why their approach is right and the others, is wrong or fundamentally even harmful for a child. So that's where it gets really tricky.
And that's what I mean, man. I suppose it's like, when the kids are young, you just have to be around, right? And you have to give them love and nurture them. But as they grow into adults and they try to find identity, that's when probably, like you said, you can really, especially as a man too, you can add even more value to your child, right? And I think it becomes less about you just being around all the time and actually, helping them gain that knowledge and gain that identity. And that can be very hard to identify whether someone's doing it well or not, or if they even are doing it consciously, right? That's the secret sauce right there, right? And I don't think anyone really knows exactly how it happens and what the true consequences are on that child, right? All that we know is that, parents, and this is something that I think that we shy away from as a society. It's actually parenting your child is probably the most important thing you'll ever do, right? And that's because not only, is it very fulfilling for you and so on, but that child is going to go into the world. It's going to outlive you. They are your legacy. And if you get it wrong, that is something that they are going to have to work on for the rest of their lives. And they may go on to pass those negative, they might go on to potentially do some maladaptive or negative things and pass on those behaviors if they indeed have kids themselves. So really, like, there's this kind of idea of, we tried our best. We did what we could, we did the best we could, right? And don't ever cast judgment on me. And I get that, right? And I get that parenting is hard. But I think we often underplay our responsibility as on a societal level in terms of what we leave our kids, right? And I know that's a tough thing to hear, right? Because the last thing I want to do is give parents any more stress and responsibility. But I do think that we do underplay it.
I get where you're coming from, but at the same time, I think that the science is less clear on some of these questions, right? So when you look at sort of all of the different interventions and strategies that there's some certain things that, like, there's a certain bandwidth of flexibility for a parent, make decision A or decision B, right? We'll move to this, send them to this better school, or we'll have this very specific parenting style that, we'll train them up a certain way. But at the same time, like, the evidence is very, very patchy on these things. And, there's actually some very strong arguments saying that actually there's very little parents can do to influence, like, outcomes, right? And that's not to say that parents themselves aren't really influential on their kids. Of course they are, but in terms of the ability for those parents to make different choices, like, it's not within every parent's choice set to I just finished watching King Richard, the father
I was just thinking about that movie.
Venus and Serena Williams. Like, we can't all be King Richard, right? Taking our kids to the tennis court every day and to turn them into superstars, right? Like, there's a certain kind of band of kind of options on the table, and that works, even just that relates to our own personalities and our own kind of tolerances for things. And I don't know, I think in that way, I'm probably a little bit more fatalist in the sense that, you want to make the right choices, but, like, you can't overthink it, I think.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess I'm talking less about the whole King Richard style moving mountains for your kids, and I'm thinking more of taking responsibility for some of the emotional development of the child. And I know it's hard with the science to draw that link, but I do think that if you ask any therapist and people who need the help, it always comes back to the parents. It always comes back to your mum and dad and the attachment style that you had with them, and how you formed a schema or a blueprint or something around how to handle conflict or how to have your worldview through, X, Y, and Z and your socialization, right? So that's the part I'm talking about. I think that this idea of passing on emotional trauma.
See, I don't know how much of that you can actually decide to affect change for anyway, right? Because, like,
someone's going to break the cycle, though.
No, but I don't think. I guess what I would say is that I'm not sure that the dispositions that we all have as people, like, by all means, you can try and do 3% better, but can you, like, totally reframe? And the other thing too, just. Kids learn from their parents, not in in a sort of a really formal instructional sense, right? They learn from their parents because they, spend time watching and observing and role modeling, right? So unless you can kind of really tackle the core of yourself and your own, that's, like, near impossible to do, right? You can try and you can have a veneer of doing it, but then that creates other problems, right? Because you're not really being, maybe you bottle your frustration and then you just become this cold, bitter person inside that, and I'm not sure that's healthy either. So, like,
I don't think those are the only alternatives. But
well, I mean, like, and I suppose it depends. Like, there's a pretty wide spectrum of things we could be talking about here. Like,
yeah, I mean, I'm very close to where you are in this, and I do understand this idea of, like, is this really practical? Can we move the needle? So should we even be thinking this way? But I would say that, like, hurt people kind of thing, right? Like, and I think that you can do something about that if you have a culture of dealing with your issues, your trauma, and not kind of going through the motions, right? So I do think that for me is what I'm talking about, right? Like trying not to pass that on. And you often get there in your own time. I do actually believe that there is personal growth in people. I just feel like sometimes it's often too late. It's like something that adults go through in their 40s and 50s. And by that time, kids have already made it to teenage,
I think even like seeing yourself as someone who wants to pursue personal growth of the kind you're talking about is itself not a choice. Like you have to be the kind of person that wants to do that in the first place to do it. Like it's not like, to give an example, like if you, let's say, look at your parents and their relationship with their parents and you see something in that you don't like, and then you make conscious efforts to try and do something else. Like I think your motivation to want to do something different, it's actually intrinsic to you. It's not something you can kind of, let's get a spreadsheet out and run it through ChatGPT to get some psychoanalysis on. Is this the and then we'll do whatever the computer says or whatever a psychologist says.
I agree, but I think that the way you're thinking of it is like a fine tuning, is like a true self-help style, like improvement. I'm thinking more for people who there are negative impacts to their life. So they're like in an addiction or any other thing, they have to kind of face it and turn around because the trauma that's left over or their emotional stability is compromised, and they either get depressed or they make bad decisions and ruin relationships, and that's what kind of triggers them to change, right?
Roger, happy Father's Day to you too. It's all a little bit too heavy for a Sunday morning. Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day.
What are you getting up to today?
I believe there is a picnic planned. So today I'm going to have a sleep-in, which is going to be amazing.
You hope.
I think, or some version of a sleep-in. Obviously, this is another thing where when we're trying to schedule between us, and you're like, oh, I don't like to have too much of an early start, and that in itself is just a sign of sweet freedom that comes with having an older kid who can also sleep in.
What's a sleep-in to you nowadays?
Okay, well, when I get up with the girl, it's dark. Put it that way. Like I open the windows and there's no light. So the sleep-in to me would be like 7:38. Yeah, that would be nice.
So are you getting intermittent sleep like throughout the day? So yeah, sure, you get up at 7:38 or whatever as a sleep-in, but then like you can have a nap like 12 to 2 or something.
No. Look, something's got to give, right? So you cannot survive on, say, less than 4 hours sleep for a long period, right? So then you've got the choice to try to go to bed earlier and compromise any kind of wind down time that you may have. Obviously, it's a given that your household is probably out of control in terms of the regular cleaning cycle of things. But if that all else fails and things really fall apart, then you have to sleep when the baby sleeps, right? And that's the advice that's always given to mothers, right? You just have to sleep when the baby sleeps. And while that does sound practical in theory, obviously what that really means is, can you be ready to sleep when that baby sleeps, right? And does your child sleep in a block, enough of a block time for you to actually fall asleep at the same time? And then obviously you don't have any time to, organize the food or clean up from the last time you tried to attempt to make food, or the laundry and a bunch of other things, right? So that is the pressure valve that you have to do. So I obviously have had to in the last week, when she goes down for a morning nap or afternoon nap, I need to try to sleep some portion of it. But you're also a grown man trying to sleep at 10 o'clock in the morning or 1:30 at night. And then I've got school runs, so I can't do some afternoons and things like that. So it's all very complicated. And it's just one of those logistical things that as you get more and more worn down, you crave more and more time to relax or have time by yourself. And it becomes this vicious cycle of the choice between sleeping and functioning versus actually some kind of relaxation to reset your mind, right? From the kind of grind of it all. But yeah.
Well, I still remember when I said to you guys, it's so good to be able to watch Netflix on your phone. You know,
I know. Oh man, I think about that a lot now, as we're all just glued to our phones, trying to carve out a minute of adult time.
Actually, not to take us down another rabbit warren, but like I found that I've got into this habit when watching movies or TV shows of literally just watching like 3 minutes at a time. Like, so I'll like even movies, like I've got like a window of time, so I'll put that movie I was watching on, but like never getting a good solid 2-hour block to watch a movie. Like just it.
Yeah, probably not 3 minutes, but I do know the feeling, kind of, and feeling like there was one series in particular that happened to me, and I think it was the new Game of Thrones, the House of Dragon, and it was just impossible to watch like 1 hour at a time. It was so broken up. And I just thought to myself, I am butchering this experience, right? Of what I think each episode broke a record for like $100 million. Like each episode had the budget of a small movie. And I'm like, I am disrespecting this to no end, right? Like watching it in 5 parts. But yeah, it is annoying for some of those things. I think that's where probably like audiobooks and things come in handy. But yeah, it's just also like once you're sleep deprived, you only have a certain amount of mental bandwidth, right? You're not really going to want to stretch yourself too much, right? Which is why I'm convinced that really shitty sitcoms like 2.5 Men are the most popular in the world, because like people are just overtired and they need something. They need like a sedation pill where they can just like drool at the TV and, all the laughs come to them.
So I want to ask you, I never really did a stay-at-home dad stint. My wife went back to work relatively early, but she was sort of the primary caregiver, so I never really had that experience. But like at the same time, like I had work, and then like before work and then after work, it was very much, okay, hands on now. Like, so you start your second job or whatever. So if anything, like going to work itself was a bit of respite, or it was, something a little bit, some adult time or whatever. But I guess from where I was sort of standing, like at the time I sort of felt, well, I'm still like in terms of hours, right? I'm still getting up as early and I'm still going to bed as late, and I'm still, if you count work at work as, equivalent to work at home, albeit it's different, it's maybe a bit more emotionally draining or whatever, I felt like I was busy, right? But the sense I'm getting from you is that it's actually harder. It is harder being at home. So I'm keen for your, like, given that you've probably had the same experience, right? Where you...
Yeah. I didn't want to turn this episode into a...
let's remember the joys of being a father for a minute.
But I will say that...
Don't have kids, anyone listening.
Yeah.
No, they're wonderful.
They are wonderful. But they'll take everything from you, including your bone marrow. Look, I think when it comes to being on both sides of the bar, right, which is part of this, this experience, is being able to truly appreciate for a meaningful amount of time what it's like for mothers primarily who take time out of the workforce to be the primary carer. And because you always kind of think that, right? And I've been in the position, 3 times before as well, right? So I understand the feeling of having the stress and the extra work of a newborn and kids at home and still trying to juggle work, right? And trying to find that balance, that work-life balance of your career and what you need to do there and your job and what you need to do, and still pitching in at home, right? And it's a careful balance. And at the time, obviously, like, I think like I've thought very much like you as well. It's like once you divide all the things that you need to do, right, it's not your choice whether you have to work or not. And it's actually not even your choice how hard you need to work sometimes, right? It's just what's going on at work. When you take all of that out and you come back and you help with the kids and you help with the house and all these kind of things that you can do, and you look at the amount of free time each person has in the partnership, shouldn't that be the real test of like how equal things are and how fair things are, right? It's not like it'd be a different story if like one partner was saying, well, I'm working and now I need to unwind, so I'm going out for a 2-hour hit on the tennis court, right? And that's afforded to me because I have been working all day instead of helping out with the kids. But often that's not the case, and it's definitely not the case in my experience of like when you get home, you kind of are helping out, and maybe you might get an hour free here and she might get an hour free there, and roughly that's the yardstick. How much free time or enjoyment time does each partner get? But I guess on this side, what it has reinforced being, if your job is primarily just to look after a kid, a young kid, under the age of 2, there are different dynamics at play. And what you find is that you can look at any kind of job or any task even with pros and cons of like how much control and autonomy you get and the fulfillment that you get from that task or job. Looking after a kid under 2, the fulfillment can be high and it peaks in different points of quite dizzying fulfillment, right? Tickling your child and they laugh uncontrollably, pure joy manifested, right? That is a high. Driving them to the shops or going on an errand and they are crying nonstop, like you are torturing them, sticking pins in their fingers, and there's nothing you can do. They are just crying. They don't have a dirty nappy. They're not hungry. They're suffering from the pain of existence. Who knows? Screaming. That's a low, right? And you have these moments. They oscillate back and forth relentlessly throughout the day, and there is no real change from that. You're locked in this kind of dance with your child with a very, very little control. You are the one calling the shots, but they are also, and they're not in control either, and they just react, right? And so it's a very unique set of circumstances and a unique task that at the end of the day, you are very, very drained and fatigued, both physically and mentally, right? And so what you're really looking for when your partner comes back from adult land is reprieve, right? You're looking for variation in the form of a new activity, a new task. It can be new responsibilities. You can do something else, right? But you want to avoid the stress that comes with your child crying, your child asking things to do things for you that you find unpleasant. And that, for some people, can be playing with them, right? Well, let's be honest, for a lot of parents, it can be playing with them, right? At certain ages and things. That's where, like, I think there is a weighting to the stay-at-home parent that it's not obvious to see by the other partner if they haven't experienced it. You kind of think, oh, well, it's just work by any means. And in fact, I saw an Instagram of you like having a banana bread in the cafe, right? Like, so really, like, I got bent over at work and I had to do all this stressful stuff, and work is stressful. And my client yelled at me and I got to do all this crap. I had to commute for an hour in a sweaty train. I'm the one who's actually, and on top of all that, I'm bringing in the money. Like, doesn't that give me the biscuit? Like, aren't I still the king? I'm funding this holiday for you at home to have magical experiences and banana bread at home, and meeting other mothers. But really, it's not quite like that, right? So I think that this experience, like, and you kind of know that, right? You know that, and you're trying to navigate it. You're trying to not get away with it, but you're trying to kind of like keep yourself sane as well, right? Because everyone has a certain amount of tolerance for this stuff, and you're just doing your best to try to keep sane as well, right? Because everyone's lifestyle takes a hit when they have kids. So I guess my view is that, yeah, it is definitely harder. Work is stressful, can be more stressful, but not as draining.
I just remember for us, I think the first 6 months were really, really hard, like from a sleep perspective. And I don't know, I have no idea how to kind of benchmark it to like, okay, is it like in line with what's normal? Was it worse than average? Maybe it was even less than average, but we just weren't prepared for it or whatever. But that was like the first 6 months. But then things got, I think, quite a bit better after that 6 months, right? And
yeah,
so, but I just remember being almost like, I mean, the only thing that kept us, I think, sane was that it was getting better, right? We could see ways that, like, the arc of kind of,
it's complicated too, right? Like, no child is the same, but then again, no parent is the same either. Some people their kid wakes up 2 times a night and they're fine with it. Some parents, their kid wakes up once a night and they are wrecked the next day. Like, it just depends, right? And like, I remember in your case, you didn't have your family support network there. So that's a factor as well, right? Like, that's the difference sometimes between making it through the weeks and months and not, because your mum or dad or grandparents can't come around and give you that day off, that night off, that refills your cup, means that you don't get divorced because you actually go on a date and you remember that you actually like each other and you're not just trying to go tit for tat and worry about all that. Like, that makes a big difference too, right? How much support that you actually have. And that's the only true parenting hack that I've ever heard that's true, is living close to your grandparents. Like, that's the only one that works.
I really do think we should move out of this territory and into a more positive space. Because we're kind of harping on all of the reasons not to have kids. But like, maybe in the spirit of Father's Day, maybe we should touch on the brighter sides. I don't know.
Yeah. There's this weird thing that, I don't know, I'm not sure if every generation feels it. I don't think they do. But I think for our generation, right, for Gen Y, millennials, I guess, you feel like you have a little bit of arrested development, like you never really grow up. I mean, I know I've felt like that for a long time. And I don't know whether it's just like a mentality, right? Because obviously we're growing up, we're getting, older and all this kind of stuff, and physically. But mentally, I feel that way. And one of the side effects of that, or one of the things that I've noticed, is that when I father the kids, I'm actually quite silly with them a lot of the time, right? And I see that actually a lot more from other fathers as well. And I don't think we are particularly young parents either. So it's not like it can be explained because we are having kids earlier. If anything, we're having kids kind of later. But just like this, like, I have no memories. And speaking to other fathers, say the same thing. They have just no memories of their parents being really silly with them. It was much more of a kind of stern relationship. And I do like how that is happening, right? Like, I actually, like, when I'm out and about and I see dads being really silly with their kids, right? And being really playful with them and really engaging. I think that's a really good thing. I think that is a new age thing, but a good thing, right? Because it'd be nice to have those memories. And I'm not one of those people who think that it compromises authority. I think you can have it both ways. What about you?
If you ask me what were like the typical parent-child relationship, say 100 years ago, I think it was completely different than it was today on both sides, both for mothers and fathers, right? And like, there's this whole like distant sort of, children should be seen and not heard, all that whole vibe, right?
Yeah.
And that's really gone now. Like, it's not like, kids are very much like, they're the center of everything, really. And they're not this, this annoying thing on the side. And so, like, I suppose, I think probably that has come later for fathers than for mothers. And I think, but it's just come in the, maybe a couple of decades sort of lagged, right? So, yeah, I mean, maybe there's some like wartime kind of legacies or something. I don't know, that kind of
yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't be laughing at that. But do you find that what I'm saying rings true for you in terms of your memories of being raised?
Yeah, but I think it's like it's connected to the role of a father. Like, that's changed. Like, we talked. I mean, you mentioned before, like, oh yeah, I bring home the bacon and all that. Like, that was the way that men saw their roles back then. And the provider, like, it's, look, my job here is to like put the roof over the head and put the food on the table. And if I'm meeting my role, my job, then I'm going to come home, have a smoke, have a beer, do what I like, and then the rest should be up to you, right? What do? You just stay at home, right? And they had those clearly defined gender roles, and that's changed. So, and it hasn't just changed in that women are now in the workforce in a much, well, almost in the equal capacity as men. But the same things happened in the household too, in that fathers are taking on a lot more of that because they've had to. And I don't know, I think that those gender kind of roles, because now there aren't really the same kind of roles in the way that there were in the past, that and also like perceptions too. Like, I don't know if it would have been seen as like a little bit inappropriate or not meeting kind of a gender stereotype if you were like that with your kids.
Definitely. Like, I think there would be like an embarrassment factor if a dad got silly. And I think even you see that permeate in old school management structures in the business world too. Like, there's that, isn't there that saying, you can't run with the sheep but sit with the foxes or something like that, right? Like this idea that you can't be silly and partake as one of the team and one of the boys and then turn around and manage them. You have to have a bit of distance so that they respect you, then they see you as an authoritarian figure, because it's very hard to switch those two modes together. So that's like an old school management psychology there too, right? But I want to go to that role a bit, right? Because here's a question for you, Andy. So say we didn't have the feminist movement, right? And all those revolutions there and equal rights and anything like that. Say that never happened in this alternate world, right? Do you think the zeitgeist and the mentality for men and fathers more specifically would lead to the same place or not?
Well, I suppose it depends what else has changed, right? Like what, I think the driver for fathers being closer to kids is that they've had to get closer to kids from it. Like the other thing I'm sort of thinking about too is like, it's not just about, when you say like feminist movement or whatever, almost as like a revolutionary sort of campaign or whatever, but it's more subtle than that. It's like identity, right? It's mothers and women, how they see themselves and their role, and how men see their roles. So, and like identity is like pretty important, like, because there would absolutely have been, in my opinion, 50 years ago or 60 years ago, who would have felt ashamed if they had to rely on their husband to manage the house and the kids in the way that happens today. It would have been viewed as like, oh, well, you're not doing your job as a mother if you have to rely on your husband in this way.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt that that's part of, and I think there's, even today, there's some mothers have that attitude, right? Would have that view of themselves, and that, so maybe not to the same extent, right? There's no space for you to change the way you behave and relate to your kids if it's not afforded to you, or you don't aspire to be that kind of way, right? And so I think this is what's changed, right? It's not just that there's been social movement.
Yeah. I guess I'm kind of saying like how much men's involvement or the changing role of fathers, right, in parenting, and especially the laborious aspects of parenting, have been driven by women versus something you think that men wish to do.
I do think there's something fundamentally different about men and women in terms of their patience for some of these things. Like I do feel mothers are just, and we'll have all these debates around, is it, nature versus nurture and all this sort of stuff. But at least in terms of, on average, women they've got that, like, they're more empathetic generally. They can talk, like, so you mentioned the roller coaster ride, right, of the day. Yeah. I do feel like they've got a little bit more patience for that, right? I don't know. What do you think? Because I suppose the reason I'm saying that is because I think it suits plenty of men just to not get involved, right? It's plenty satisfactory for them to be able to go and play golf, right, on the weekend. Like, maybe they want to go and play with their kids and have fun with their kids and all that sort of stuff. But I don't think there's a natural kind of instinct. It's almost a bit how, like, in World War I, there was like great pride in going to war and even dying on the battlefield or something, right? And that was part of the identity of a certain group of people at a certain period of time. It's almost like a little bit the same with mothers and their kids. Like, oh no, I'm sacrificing everything for my kids because that's who I am, and that's. I think fathers on average are a bit more selfish, to be honest.
I think so. That's what I was trying to coax out of you. I actually think that I believe most of the changing role has been driven by women and expectation of women, of modern women. I think a happy side effect is that men are finding more fulfillment, and a cross section of men now allowed to do things that maybe they wanted to that were maybe less socially acceptable. But I do think it's driven, and especially the more laborious aspects, like you said, by men, because I think that you still see that today, right? Like, I mean, I know people, and I'm sure you do too, that let's just pick on golfers for a moment, because that's the most extreme example of that. I actually think golf was invented so that men could just like spend heaps of time away from that.
Walk around the park with sticks.
Yeah, let's make some carts, right? Because we don't want to walk and do too much exercise.
We need somewhere to hold our beer.
Yeah. But like, that's a really good example. I know people who have somehow, I don't know how they've massaged it, but they do have deals where, they work a 50-hour week and then, you only have so much time to spend with your family and your wife and your kids. And they do the whole 18 holes and they're out pretty much for a day. Right. So, and it's part of the deal. And they've been doing it for years. Right. Now that is very far from an equal situation. Right. But it is a bit of a zero-sum game in that respect. Right. For most family units, that the man who is taking that time is taking it from his partner. And I guess where I'm going with this is that I do think that, so you see modern day examples of it, right? Like, not every relationship is equal. And then even for the ones that are equal, going back to your line there, I think that women do more of the domestic duties, because I do think some of it is pride and competition with and their identity, like you said, competition with other people, with other women, because they want to be known as someone who has their life together, that cares for their family, that they can organize things, that can do X, Y, and Z. And men are a little bit, like you said, less empathetic to the, or less kind of, they place less emphasis on those things, right? Those kind of keeping up with the Jones. They don't maybe see that doesn't manifest in that direct way, right? And I reverse back to like, this idea of the blueprint for this has already happened, right? It's in the 50s and our parents, right? And the generation before, where women kind of stayed at home and they were homemakers and stuff like that. And even that, like, when you think of the stereotypical 1950s housewife, the Stepford housewife that dotes on the husband and does all this stuff, you think of them as like some kind of Mother Teresa type that's just totally selfless, gives everything they have to their kids. But that's not the case. Like, if you think about it, choosing a career as a stay-at-home mom is a lot like being a partner, or you're working your way to the partnership at a consultancy, right? Like, I think that it's a rough start when you have young kids, right? You are churning, you're burning, you're surrounded by incompetent graduates that you have to do everything for them. You are carrying all the workload. But if you make it to the partner track, all of a sudden, more work awaits you in real life, but just stick with me with this analogy. All of a sudden, you've got all these people slowly getting more and more competent underneath you, with less and less for you to do, but your role doesn't really change, right? So it's kind of like a front-loaded experience for your career. You churn and burn at the start, and then life gets progressively better and better. And by the time your kids are in school, in high school, in university, you're essentially retired. You're like retired 2 decades before your husband, right? And you share all the finances. So I think that it's like, to me, I see it as a different proposition, and like the only change there is like what society values. And right. And so I think it's like, I think it actually makes sense in a lot of ways, right? Like, that people would choose that. I don't think it's selfless at all. Anyway, I think we've gotten way off track. Yes. Should we?
I actually have one. So, and we touched on it a little bit before. I mean, you mentioned around the relationships that fathers have with kids being a bit more sort of, or I think you sort of, I don't know, silly or whatever however you put it, playful, whatever. I mean, it's a stronger bond, right? And you kind of said, oh yeah, it doesn't sort of restrict your ability to kind of be tough when you need to or whatever. And then we talked about mothers and, how mothers on average are kind of can sort of push through it a bit more empathetic and all that sort of stuff. So my recollection, and not necessarily my own personal one, but certainly like it's the stereotypical wait till your father hears about this kind of thing, right? It's there's a certain dynamic where the mother in like a heterosexual kind of couple, like mother and father sort of situation, right? It's the good cop, bad cop, right? It's like the father is always the bad cop. The father is the one who is going to like dose out the justice when it needs to come, right? They're going to be the one that's going to come and, turn up and like that dynamic is really interesting because it on one hand, like there's, I think, a modern kind of view of like, oh, that's a very sort of, being tough to kids is like so cruel and all this sort of stuff. But like life's cruel, right? And I do think...
Do you think it's still like that though?
Yeah, I think so I'll say my own personal experience, right? Probably my natural instincts were to be like a lot more kind of tolerant, understanding, work with them to resolve their challenges or whatever. But sometimes you just need to be a hard ass, right? Like you just need to say no and just say, no, not having any of that. They can be bawling their eyes out, upset, say, no, sorry, like this is the way it is. And it's that like hard constraint that fathers are kind of increasingly, well, always probably have been called on to play, but certainly in a context of like mothers, my sense, everyone, call me sexist if you think I'm stereotyping here, but like I think mothers are more kind of they're soft, right? They're softer, don't you think?
I think it definitely used to be like that. I'm not sure it is like that now, because when you think about it, right, it is very unfair in some ways that like if traditionally the father is working long hours or just working and spending less time with the kids, that they also, when the little time that they do have to connect with their kids, they also have a long list of like punishment to dole out at the end of the day, therefore driving a further wedge between them, the connection between them and their kids. So I think that it's quite unfair to do that. And I've seen something a little bit different emerge now, which is more like the whole, the black mirror of that dads that do work quite long hours feel quite guilty. And so when they do spend time with their kids, they're often like showering them with gifts or attention or even treat-like things, whether it's food, toys, whatever it may be. And then it forces the mother to have to be the one that's driving for order and, and discipline. So I have seen that model as well, especially from fathers who have very demanding careers and work life. I would say on average, I do agree with you that the aggression and I think it goes back to this threat of physical violence. As horrible as that sounds, I do think it harks back to those days of the belt. But I do think it comes more naturally for men to pose that threat, or because it's in the tone. It's not it's just the message and standing firm and doing it in a really kind of logical way. I think sometimes it's more than that. It's the threat. It's the tone. It's the energy. And I think that's something that comes a bit more naturally to men playing that role. And it's probably something that just sometimes the mother just need, if they're doing it because they're a stay-at-home mother, they've been trying to chip away at the problem, and they just need a new batter to step up to the plate and have a swing. And sometimes that's enough to make it work.
Yeah.
So I do think it's like it's all those things, right? But I don't know. I mean, do you think it comes from a place of aggression or threat?
No, I actually think it comes down to like emotional blackmail, right? Like I think kids can pull take at the heartstrings, right? And I think on average, like fathers are less like
manipulated.
Yeah, like I think that's what it boils down to. Like, and that now, of course, that doesn't mean that's the case in every parental situation, and it's hard. Like, and I don't know. As I said, I don't know what the optimum like balance between the two is, because you want to be empathetic. I mean, it depends what we're talking about too, right? If it's like correcting behaviors because they're like doing the really like bad things or whatever, misbehaving. Like, I'll be honest, like my boy's pretty well behaved, right? He never gets in trouble at school. At the end of the day, when push comes to shove, he'll do as he's told, all that sort of stuff, right? And maybe this is out on us, right? But he's very, very good. He's very effective at like knowing the right way to wear us down, like in terms of like, and just simple stuff like getting him to bed on time is like, it's always just such a.
He plays the long game.
Oh, it's like Like, there's always something, like, and then eventually you get to that point where you're just like, no, sorry, you're taking the piss now.
Yeah.
Go to fucking bed.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Look, so I've taken up the lion's share due to my stay-at-home status, but I think I want to maybe end the episode with what your perfect Father's Day is, because that's a question that always gets thrown around. It's a very cheesy question on talkback radio and stuff like that, or even celebrity fathers that come on to talk shows and things. Have you ever thought about, if you had it your way, what you'd really want on Father's Day?
I can probably do it by exception by saying what I don't.
I'll tell you what I don't want.
What I don't want is like a pair of socks and like a bag of Rocky Road, you know? Like, I don't need any more kind of pointless, just filler presents, you know? Like, that stuff doesn't interest me. So I don't even want a card, you know. I find cards, those Father's Day cards, it goes in the bin like literally the same day. Like, I don't keep this, I don't display it. Like, come on, I don't even read it. It's got some Hallmark message written by a graduate. It's of no value to me.
Chat GPT now.
So I think it's just being able to do just to be able to do the things you want to do on that day, isn't it? Like, and not necessarily.
That's tough though, Andy, because you can't ideal Father's Day can't be spending time away from family, can it?
Sleeping in.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I can only complain about shitty presents.
Have you been given socks and Rocky Road?
No, I actually haven't, but I probably have given them.
Well, that's another question. Like, how much do you think it goes up the chain? Like, do you do anything for your dad?
Oh, well, I mean, I always get like a Father's Day
card.
No, I usually default to a like a bottle of wine, just because I don't think you can.
Yeah, that's
wrong.
nice. That's classy.
And not like nothing expensive, but just like at least like there's a utility value. Like, at least it's definitely going to be consumed.
What's your take on what I feel can be sometimes dipping into the condescending category of every father just wants a Bunnings gift card?
No, definitely not.
Yeah, don't you find that so condescending? Even if it is true, like there probably is something that you need, but
yeah, no. All right, well, it's a somewhat depressing Father's Day episode, I got to say. But
I can't even tell anyone.
Happy Father's Day, everybody.
Happy Father's Day. No, I know it came across a bit dark, but it's really not. Like, I think that my attitude towards all this stuff is that it is still like such a privilege to have the experiences that come with fatherhood, right? And even more so being on the other side of the fence, which I'm on right now, which, you know, I hope that more and more men get to experience in some ways, right? Because like life's all about experiences and growing from them, right? And this part of fatherhood, when you have young kids, doesn't last forever, right? Like you yourself, Andy, hardly even remember it, right?
Yeah.
You know, you blink and it's gone, right? So while it can leave its its impressions on you, it's gone in a minute. And that's the thing with kids, right? Like it's like having a monkey that slowly learns how to talk, right? It's like incredible. It's and I think that you just have to do your best to be present, even though there are things that are hard. And parenting is about sacrifice, right? And it does reward you back in spades. So happy Father's Day to everyone who's listening.
And on that note, please treat this as a public service announcement if you're considering.
Elon wants you to repopulate the Earth, but I bet he's not raising them.